So if you're in the market for watercolor paper and you don't have a lot of experience, I wanted to just kind of go over a few of the things that go into what makes a good watercolor paper. And then we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about things that don't really reflect whether or not it's a good paper, but maybe preferences, things that might be more interesting to the type of art that you want to do. And we'll get into that as well. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to a quality paper is cotton, okay? The more cotton in your paper, the stronger it will be. A lot of times a studio grade or an economy grade paper will have less or no cotton in it. If you look at the Fabriano Studio watercolor paper, it is 25% cotton. Now it's cotton rag. That's what you want, the cotton rag that's a high quality. And what that's going to do is give this paper some strength, but it's not 100% cotton. There's also wood pulp in it to make up for that. Where a professional quality watercolor paper is 100% cotton rag. With that being said, that doesn't mean that this is going to be a bad paper. It's just, as it said, an economy-made paper. So when it comes to that wood pulp portion, you want to make sure that it's A, acid-free, and B, lignin-free. These are things that prevent yellowing over time. And that's fine. That's fine. There's no shame in using this, but I'm trying to show you how the higher-end papers kind of step up their game a little bit. The other thing about a paper that is an economy-made paper is they are machine-made papers. Now, why would that affect the quality of the paper? Well, for one thing, a machine-made paper has a grain. Okay, so when you think about a grain, going against the grain, so whether it's, you're shaving with the grain, against the grain, or if you are, trying to cut something down the grain or across the grain means that one direction you tear the paper will be harder than the other direction. When you go with the grain, it will tear easily. And machine-made papers have a grain to them because they are usually put in a machine and the machine will shake them forward and back, creating a grain going the direction the paper is being shook. So, for example, if this paper, when it was in the mold, when it was in the machine, was being shook like this, that's creating a grain going one way. Where a mold-made paper, which we're going to get to a little bit later, is made when they put it in the mold, they're shaking it in all directions, meaning that there's no grain. So it's more resilient from every angle that it's coming at. So I would have no problem using this paper, this economy grade paper. It's great, but now we're going to talk about why people step up the game, why spend the extra dollar to get a professionally made paper. And when you're going to talk about that, you're going to be getting into mold-made papers. Now, mold-made papers like these are all Fabriano Artistico papers. I've got different paper weights, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and presses. And I also have their extra white, which is still this is all their Artistico, which is their high end. And the extra white is just literally, there's no bleach in it. They've just picked the brightest cotton and put it into this paper, where this is a more traditional white. And that doesn't go into quality at all. It's just preference. As I said, we'll kind of also talk about that. And then we also have, kind of on par with a mold-made paper, handmade paper. Now, handmade paper, in my opinion, is a little bit more advanced. And I say that because when you're dealing with mold-made papers, and especially machine-made papers, they're generally very uniform, okay? A machine-made paper is going to be uniform across the bat. Every sheet's going to be the same, look the same, uniform. With mold-made papers, you're going to see slight variations in the decal of edges because of the mold that they were made in. Some papers come with 4 deckled edges, others come where they cut the decals off, or maybe just one edge is deckled. It's kind of a preference. There's actually a tool that we used to sell called an art deckler to give the effect of a decal when that was, or if it is still something that you are looking to obtain. Now, with that being said, a handmade watercolor paper, just like mold-made watercolor paper, is made of 100% cotton rag, okay? And another thing that we haven't gotten to yet when it comes to these calipers of paper is they are internally and externally sized. Okay, why is that important? Why is the sizing important? Why, if you have it on the outside, you need it on the inside? And again, it goes back to the resiliency and the absorption. Okay, when you lay color down on a piece of paper that doesn't have any sizing, the color gets pulled into the paper and it dulls. Because these papers are sized internally and externally, first of all, the color will remain on top and not get dragged into the paper. But that internal sizing is almost like a backup sizing, because depending on the type of art you do, if you like to lift or use those kind of techniques where you do washes, it will prevent buckling and or the paper tearing or pilling up. You know how some paper can pill up if it gets wet or scrubbed? Even if you're just using a pencil and eraser, if the paper's not quality enough, you'll get those kind of pills or tears. But the handmade paper, why I say it's kind of more advanced, is that each sheet is like a snowflake, completely unique to the next one. This is internally and externally sized. This is 140 pound, what they consider cold pressed. It looks a little bit rougher than traditional cold pressed because it is handmade. And you'll see the imperfection is the beauty in these papers. It's the appeal. It's these little things where the cotton kind of bunched up and they just let it ride. You see, each page looks very unique and has a unique texture to it. And that's very exciting for an artist that already knows what they're going to create, because it will add this level of variance to their art that a beginner might not want. They might want to, have that uniform paper every time so that they can kind of track their progress. There's some art that was done earlier, koi fish, so you can kind of see that. Really nice. And of course, you put them in these nice little journals, but they're also available in sheets like this. A standard watercolor paper sheet is 22 by 30, okay? And now we're going to kind of, with that being said, talk about preference, all right? Those 22 by 30 sheets of watercolor paper are mold made. However, you can get professional mold made paper in pads and blocks. So although this Fabriano pad is their studio and not their artistico, so it's the 25% cotton, this is the Stonehenge, and this is 100% cotton, and also 140 pounds. And this, in terms of, we're talking about preference now, is my preference. I like working on blocks. Blocks are taped down on all the sides so that you can do a painting, let it dry, and that's the key. You have to let it dry and then take it up. There's usually a corner or something where it's loose, so you can slide like a palette knife or something underneath it to release it. Now, there is one downside to a block, and that is the fact that you can really only work on one painting at a time, where some people like to jump around multiple paintings. I'm more of a person that kind of sticks to this one project at a time, so that's why I kind of can easily say I prefer a block. But again, we're talking preference now. So that's going to be based on what you like to do. And also you can get pads where the paper is, not taped down on the sides, but it can still be mold made. They've just cut it. So it went through the mold. It was made the same way these large sheets were made, and then they just made them in a more convenient form of block or pad. Okay, so what do I have here? We're going to talk about preference, okay? And what makes a good watercolor paper is a watercolor paper that suits your needs, okay? Above and beyond everything we've already discussed, the cotton, the internal, external sizing, the acid-free, the lignin-free, all that stuff. What would be good for your art? And a lot of that has to do with, well, how wet and how rough you're going to be with it. So if you plan on doing something that's a little bit more illustration based, you don't necessarily need a 300-pound watercolor paper. Now I'm going to show you the difference, okay? This top sheet right here is Fabriano Artistico rough press, traditional white, 90 pounds, okay? Now the poundage of paper is determined by how much it weighs in, I think it's like bulk sheets of 400 or something. There's a standard amount of sheets that they pile up, and based on the weight of that, it comes to the total weight. So 90 pound, because it's thinner, this is not a 90 pound sheet obviously, but when it's all stacked up in that kind of uniform size, it weighs 90 pounds because they are thinner. So you can kind of see I can easily bend it. It's probably on par with a heavy duty sketch paper, maybe some mixed media kind of paper. But you can get all the textures. This comes in hot press, cold press, rough. You can get it in bright, extra white. You can get it in traditional white. It has all the features and benefits of all the mold-made papers, it's just thinner because some people prefer that. It's their preference. They want it to be lighter. And they don't need to do a heavy wash, so they're not worried about buckling as much and those sort of things. Here we have 140 pound. This is a 140 pound hot press paper, just so you can also see the difference there. So, you know, the texture is different, and when it comes to those presses, it's literally, I want you to think about it like an iron, okay? So a hot press has been pressed with a hot iron. So what happens when you do a hot iron on something? It smooths out the wrinkles, which is why this kind of has like a plate finish. Where a cold press is like putting a cold iron over a shirt. It's going to get some of those bumps out, but the wrinkles still exist. And then a rough has a completely different press altogether, depending on who makes it, and will have the most texture to it. So side by side, we're not looking at the texture difference now, because we already understand this is hot press and this is rough, but I want you to look at the weight of the paper. So this is 140 pounds. So it also has some bend to it, but it's not. It is thicker and more resilient in terms of how much water it can handle before it starts to buckle than a 90 pound. And then going on to the end of that spectrum, we have a 300 pound cold press paper. Okay, now this is almost like, this is thicker like cardstock. Okay, so where I can, you know, easily bend that up, this isn't bending. This is pretty heavy, and this is ideal for those that like to get as rough and wet as possible with their watercolor painting, because it can accept large washes. It can accept, if you're using things like our Aqualift sponges, you can scrub this all day long, and I mean, I shouldn't say all day long. You can scrub this quite a bit before you have to worry about any damage to the paper, because it is quite strong. But even at the 90 pound, it has the internal and external sizing. So even though there's so much less to the weight of the paper, these are still made the same way, internally and externally sized. So keep that in mind. And then finally, when it comes to preference, we have the extra white. And as I said at the start of the video, the extra white is particularly good for people that are looking for that brightest white, because when you do watercolor paintings, unless you're using a Chinese white, which is basically a white gouache, the white of your painting comes from the paper. So if you're looking for very vivid, vibrant colors, a bright white paper is going to allow the watercolor, which is transparent, to appear even brighter than it would on a traditional watercolor paper. But it's called traditional watercolor paper simply for the fact that a traditional watercolor artist does like that it makes it a little bit more subtle. They don't want it necessarily bright. There is no right or wrong. This is all preference. Now, there is something that is an outlier and actually kind of new to the whole watercolor scene, and that is black watercolor paper. Black watercolor paper is a bit of a novelty and a little bit newer and kind of trendy right now. It's still available in 100% cotton. It's still available in lesser, you know, like 25% cotton and probably just 100% wood pulp. Basically what I'm saying is you can find it in a high-end artist quality, or you can find it in a less expensive quality if you just want to play around with it. But what's making them so unique right now is a lot of watercolor artists are using these metallic colors that are available because they just make such a really crazy, beautiful effect. So if you look, I'm just going to kind of spray down my watercolors here, and I'm just going to kind of show you what you can get when using a black watercolor paper. Let's see, this green looks really nice. And when you paint this on a black page, and I'll also put it next to the bright white so you can see the difference, okay? All right, so we'll start right here on the white paper, the bright white paper. Okay. You can see a little bit of metallic to it, just a slight bit to it. Okay, because there are reflective properties in it to give it that sheen. But then when you put it onto the black watercolor paper, it seems to just really shine. It really pops. It really makes a strong impact. And it looks really cool, and you can make really cool art with that. They also have like neon colors, and I will warn you that a lot of these colors are fugitive, which means they're not considered light fast for artist use. That doesn't mean that you can't use them and have fun with them. That doesn't mean that you can't keep them in a room that's away from direct sunlight under protective glass to keep it lasting longer. it's just not going to be as resilient to light as a professional light fast pigment, okay? So we're just going to go into this kind of hot pink here. And these are fluorescent colors. And these colors are available in our Soho Easy Lift watercolor pan set, which is what I'm using here. But then again, I'm going to go right here now and show you, yeah, so that's like a really, really vibrant, almost like an opera rose, but kicked up to 11. And now I'll go over here to the black watercolor paper and just show you how it shows up nicely on there. Now in comparison, a regular watercolor will not show up very well on black paper. So let me just kind of show you what I mean by that. All right, so I'm just going to go into any random color here. There's an orange right here. Orange can work. And load my brush. And just to show you here, again, this is the extra white. There's your watercolor, nice and vibrant. It pops really nicely because the white is so bright underneath it. And then we'll go right onto the black paper, and it just doesn't have the same impact. Where the black paper, in my opinion, particularly shines the most is with the metallic colors. It really makes something unique and different, and I think that's why it's so popular right now, is people aren't used to seeing something like this where it's just so bright and shiny. So yeah, so ask yourself, you know, are you going to be wanting to do a lot of large washes? If you're going to be doing a lot of large washes, a thicker paper might be a good paper for you. If you're going to be doing a lot of lifting, like you're going to just do one big giant wash of sky and then come in with some kind of blotting device or scrubber and lift out clouds, again, you're going to need a more resilient mold-made paper. There are plenty of applications where a machine-made paper that's 25% cotton will be fine. But if you want a good, strong, resilient paper, mold-made is the way to go. And again, kind of like a more advanced would be that handmade watercolor paper we talked about earlier, which again is internally and externally sized, and the same, just each page is unique, which is pretty fun. I like that. So do you have any more questions about what makes good watercolor paper? What watercolor paper do you use? Share it in the comments below. It's always helpful to everybody to see what everybody's using. If this is helpful, also let us know what you would like to know more about. What would make a good fill in the blank? Let us know. Please be sure to like the video if this is helpful to you, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell to be notified when we post new videos. We'll be doing this as a series, and we'll be continuing to explore the features and benefits of a higher end product and what makes a quality product when it comes to anything art.